Morning. Welcome to the Parks, Arts, and Education and Equality Subcommittee. Today is February 22nd, 2017. I will be calling this meeting to order. I have three call to the public. Jerry Van Gass.
And councilmen, I think you all got a copy February 10th of a demand letter. If not, I've got some extra copies here. And it was referencing the loan of $15 million from 3PI to the Golf Course Enterprise Fund back in 2013. A year later, 2014, April 16th, council came back and voted unanimously, 8-0, and called it a loan to be repaid. Unfortunately, there were no terms at that time as to a repayment schedule and in a timeline. As the lenders, the people are demanding that money be paid back in a timely fashion. What was disconcerting was we had a meeting with 3PI Oversight Committee on the 10th. Grant Thornton, the accountant for the city, could not explain why the amount, the loan, shows up nowhere on the books, which, seems pretty disingenuous to the public. That's an outstanding loan that is owed to the public. And we want it reflected, and we want it paid back. Initial demand letter was sent out last May 3rd by our attorney, Tom Stoops. Our other attorney sent a subsequent one just this past February 10th, once again reiterating this money is owed to the public. And the lenders were the city, were the council, the city staff. They're the borrowers. They don't get to set the terms. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I'm a little concerned at the present time after attending the last oversight committee for 3PI money that they're not receiving the correct documentations. They're not provided really enough information to make any type of determination of how the money is being used. An oversight committee is a committee that is protecting the public's interest. That's why it's formed. For 3PI, the oversight committee has not protected anything. It never has. And we need to sit back and really reevaluate what oversight committees do. If they're not protecting the public's interest, then what good are they? 3PI has an abundance of money that should be used particularly for the parks. When Grant Thornton could not answer specific questions from what they were given from the city about how the money is being used, I have a problem with this. I have a problem when I'm looking at what the money was spent for, and I do not understand what the money is being spent for. And the individuals on this council should have the same questions that I'm asking at the present time. Your duty is to the people. It is to protect and make sure that the health, safety, and welfare of the money is being protected. And it hasn't been. When you took the money for the golf courses, it was an illegal taking. It should never have been taken that way. It was a bogus legal opinion that wasn't even available until I requested it that night. So I'm asking this council, really, we need to take a better attitude towards protecting public funds. Thank you.
Greta?
Good morning, Councilwoman Pastor and members of the subcommittee. My name is Greta Rogers. I'm here, as Jerry and Tim have expressed, for concern about the maluse of 3PI. But I'm going to address the Financial Oversight Committee that was established as part of 3PI when it was originally established some 15 or so years ago. First of all, except for Roger Peck, who resigned at the last meeting a week or two ago, none of those people knows how to read a financial statement. And reading a financial statement isn't the same as reading your grocery tab or your tab from Walmart. This is what is given as a financial statement, and I'll let you pass it around. This is 40 pages. This is from last year's 3PI Oversight Committee annual summary. This is 40 pages times 43 entries. And there are things on here that are absolutely incomprehensible because they aren't detailed. So you may pass this around, and I like it that. All that is a listing of bills paid for items listed. There's no invoice, there's no date of payment, there's no receipt. And that's what a financial statement shows. And any accountant, you don't even have to be a CPA, knows that. I learned that in my 101 accounting class in college, and I'm not an accountant. This kind of thing is misrepresentation to the public and to you who represent us. And it's time that you step up and say, halt. We want this done correctly and completely with full understanding of what was purchased, what was paid for, and the legitimacy of it. I want this whole scam stopped. And you reauthorize an oversight committee and you put people on it who know how to read and interpret a financial statement, not just somebody who is going to rubber stamp. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. So could we put in our next agenda, the Oversight Committee and a update? Thank you. Minutes, item number 1 is minutes of the meetings. For approval or correction, the minutes of the Parks, Arts, Education, and Equality Subcommittee meeting, January 25th. Do I have a motion?
Motion approved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is passed. I have consent actions 2 through 4. Are there any items on here that you would like to pull to discuss? Okay. Items to move forward?
Motion to approve the consent agenda, items 2 through 4.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Motion passes. Information only, items 5 through 9. Is there some items then on 5 through 9 that you guys like to pull? Councilman Nowakowski.
Under Parks and Rec Board agenda,
Uh-huh.
so we just heard that Roger resigned from what? From the board? or-
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, he resigned from the Oversight Committee.
Okay.
He believed that the chairperson, who is now Sarah Porter, should be the representative, and so we're working on getting her onto the Oversight Committee.
All right, thank you.
So nothing else. Information let's see, item number 10. We're on item number 10, Park Ranger update.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, today we're here to give you an update as requested last month about the park rangers. And with me today, I have Alonzo Avidia here to give the update and to answer any questions and kind of tell you where we're at with the park ranger program. As you know, the park rangers educate and do a variety of things for our mountain parks and preserves, and over the years have had many reductions through the program. So I'll let Alonzo take it from there.
Thank you, Inger. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your time today. I'm hoping to do a quick overview, a little bit of the history of the Park Ranger program itself, some functions of the Park Ranger position itself, and the current standing of the position itself. This is an amazing shot here of North Mountain if you're wondering what area we're talking about. And one of the great things about our program is that it interfaces with the urban population so intimately, which is one of the positives, but at the same time it causes some opportunity to react to the public and make sure we educate them properly. And that's one of the main reasons we do have our Park Ranger program. 4 functions, and they do a lot of different things out in the mountain parks and preserves. But the main function that usually they all fall under, it's either preservation, maintenance, education, and of course enforcement of park rules and regulations. If we focus in a little bit on the preservation piece of it, we have over 41,000 acres of property. That includes obviously our Sonoran Preserve, our South Mountain, North Mountain area, and all the areas that you're familiar with as well. 41,000 acres is a big piece of property, of course. A lot of things happen from the flora and the fauna on there to the wildlife that we have to maintain. The park rangers take that seriously, and that's one of their main intents. It's really to educate the public on how we preserve and protect that property for future use. Our operation is 7 days a week. We run from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the afternoon, or the evening rather. So it's a long day. We do a lot of coverage in there. We have morning shift and an afternoon shift as well, where the park rangers are trying to be out there as much as possible. Another main piece is our maintenance. Our maintenance piece, we have over 230 miles of designated trails. That is a large portion of trail system out there for the public to use, but it's also a big portion of what the park rangers try to accomplish in their daily use, which is trail maintenance. From general trail maintenance of the trail system itself, to the signage, the park signage, the amenities. We have 41 primary trailheads, and it's a little more specific in your report there, but 41 major trailheads. This is parking locations, this could be a restroom, this could be a water fountain, those kind of things. Those are the primary locations where people access our mountain parks and preserves. But as you can imagine, above that, there's a lot of secondary access points as well. That means people are able to really access that from a lot of the communities that they live in or that they drive by. And those are the secondary locations. It might just be an entry point with on-street parking. Another piece I'd like to touch base on is the education and programming, which is a big function of what the park rangers do. Whether it's inside the classroom, if you look at the upper right-hand corner there, depending which direction you're looking, whether they're in the classroom trying to teach the younger population on what to expect when they get out to our mountain parks and preserves, or actually at a trailhead, interacting with the public and the users on a daily basis. We're fortunate we have a lot of individuals that have experienced the mountain parks and preserves while growing up here in the state, but we also get a lot of visitors, a lot of tourism coming into these facilities, and that's a great time to educate them of obviously our Arizona heat, for example, what exactly our trail system is like. It's like no other out there, and what to expect when they're out there. So preparation is big key. You do have a couple of handouts in your packet there. First one is the Take a Hike, Do It Right campaign, which I assume most of you have heard at this point. It's been part of our media campaign for the last several years. And it's really just a proactive approach on what to expect, how to prepare for it, and once you're out in the element, some of the things that you should responsibly have in your possession, be it a cell phone, proper attire, those kind of things. But obviously, if you do run into situations, we hope that you obviously have your cell phone with you so we're able to interact with you directly and get you help as soon as possible. The other portion you have out there is is Knowing Your Ability, is the other pamphlet you have in your hand there. And this really just helps, again, for that preemptive approach of knowing your own personal ability of what to expect when you're out there, your own abilities, and to be accountable of that and be responsible of that for yourself. Unfortunately, even with this education and a lot of the interaction we try to have our limited resources be out there as far as our park rangers, we do experience rescues, and those are very serious in nature, from the sprained ankle to obviously to the other side of the spectrum on those. In 2016, we had 278 rescues, fire-assisted rescues. Prior to that, the previous year, we had 227, and the previous year, we had 219. You see that escalation, and that really is attributed, obviously, to the more popular use of our trail system and the ability for us to provide that access to individuals as well. So our numbers are increasing, so we have to obviously understand that that might be a piece of it as well. But it does not stop us or hinder us from trying to get as much education to the public as possible. The last piece that I'll touch base on is enforcement. Although we want to try to educate or get compliance through education, which is the primary focus for park rangers, to go out there and interact, educate the public, not only on use, safe, and those kind of things, but sometimes there is enforcement pieces of it, and they take that seriously as well. In 2016, we had 1,024 citations. The majority of those are parking citations for the most part. Those are very blatant, those are very obvious for park rangers to notice and see and be able to interact. But unfortunately, we also have other kinds of issues. On the upper left, you'll see some of our park rules and regulations. So that could be our hours of operation, that could be obviously pets on a leash, appropriately protected as well, and of course, again, like I mentioned, parking. On the right, we also experience some graffiti and those kind of things. We have unique scenarios out there as well, be it maybe a tree on top of Camelback or those kind of scenarios we have to address as well. So those fall into those enforcement pieces too, and how we react to that is important. And our park rangers are fortunately at that front line most of the time with those kind of situations. Wanted to talk again briefly on where we are currently with our park ranger positions in fiscal year 16 and 17. We have 55 allocated positions. Out of those positions, we have 38 that are full-time Ranger 2s, and those are really the boots on the ground. And then we have 7 park ranger supervisors and 10 part-time staff. Also park ranger 2s. So a total of 55 bodies that we accounted for as park rangers. We are hoping obviously to increase that, and we're always hoping to increase that, but those are the numbers we have right now. The picture you see there is really part of their training. This is one of the last classes that went through, and they went through the court procedure training, and they were in the courts to understand what the process is there. So this is one of our last academies as well. Further broken down, and again, I believe you have it in your report, if we look at that in the general fund versus 3PI, in general fund, we have 33 positions out of those 55 that are allocated in the general fund, and which equates to roughly $2.3 million. The other portion, the other 22 positions are allocated in 3PI. Those 22 positions account for $1.8 million of the 3PI budget as well. So that equates to the total 55 positions we currently have in our budget. In the general fund, we have 33 positions, which roughly equates to $2.3 million. Like many departments in 2007, 2008, we experienced reductions, as my director mentioned and alluded to. We have since lost 13 positions throughout those years, and it was reduced by 13 positions. So we have focused our operation in our mountain parks and preserves. We've considered those resources in our mountain parks and preserves as the reason you may not see a park ranger on a daily basis out in our flatland parks, because they're really focused on our 41,000 acres of mountain parks and preserves, which would, if not for a park ranger, wouldn't get the attention it deserves. The last piece I'll mention, obviously, there's a lot of use out there. Our technology has improved as well, and I'll mention that as well. We have trail counters at 40 major trailheads, and this is really the technology where it's an infrared location. People walk through it, it really tracks those numbers. We experience about 3.1 million visitors just in those 40 locations as far as trail counters. Those are amazing numbers. They're nationally, they rival some of the national state parks, of course, no doubt. 3.1 million is definitely a big number. Obviously, it does not account for some of our other minor trailheads or even secondary access points that the public accesses trail mountain parks and preserves. You do have a snapshot on your report of our top 10, at least in December. I do have an updated one as well, but they're usually about the same top 10, just from popularity standpoint. And this is something we report on a monthly basis just to make sure we're tracking the information. And what we're hoping to do with this information and what we do with this information is really focus our education at those points, be it safety, be it awareness, or be it those kind of scenarios where we know we're getting those numbers to these locations. That makes the most common sense to try to get some interjection with our park rangers at that point. With that said, if there's any questions I can help answer.
I'm going to go to item 10, and I have cards on item 10 before, if that's okay with my colleagues, before we ask questions. Jerry Van Gass.
Thank you again. Before I delve into maintenance and rangers on the trails, I want to compliment the usage, the correct usage of 3PI money. Years ago, we built up north on Deer Valley Road, Reach 11 soccer complex, which is, by any estimation, you talk to coaches from around the world, it's a world-class facility. This past weekend, even with the rain, we had 486 teams from around the country here in the valley spending, upwards of $10 million economic impact. And all the games were played. Some were on Sunday because of the fields were drenched, were penalty kicks. But even those, the kids stopped at about 4 o'clock, even the referees, to watch the incredible rainbow, backdropped by the McDowells. So everybody left with good impression. And the week before, there were 400 teams here in the Valley playing. We got 300 coming in this weekend. It's an economic cow. It's a driver. And that's where I want to see the money spent. We spent $4 million to build the restrooms, the trailhead facilities, and the trail at Echo Canyon. I don't know the update, but we're supposed to have trail maintenance ongoing at these facilities, and you don't buy a Porsche not to maintain it. We've got world-class amenities here called mountains that we need to take care of, and if that means working on them in the summer, which we should when the people aren't using them, that's when we should be doing it. Thank you.
Tim Sarakowski.
Thank you once again. I'm a little confused, Alonzo, and I have to direct this to you. Rangers don't really have interaction on the mountain. Rangers aren't found on the mountains. They're not hiking the mountains. They're not to be found anywhere. So when you sit and tell that all this presentation, it's really great, but it's not fixing the problem. We need rangers. You can sit here and stroke everyone and say you're doing all this, but the truth is, because I'm up there all the time, none of this is being done. You can sit here and scam everyone you want, but the true essence here is none of it is being done. I want to repeat this because I'm really sick of all we're teaching these kids, we're doing interaction, we're doing all this. No, it's not. It's all a lie. It's a facade. It's all crap. You need to hire rangers. You need to get people up there doing what you say you're doing because you're not doing any of it. The park system is to educate. I don't see any education on the mountains. I don't see anyone up there at all. So when everyone keeps saying, we're up there, we're doing all this stuff, it's all crap. Hire rangers. All this presentation is a waste of time because it's all crap. And someone needs to start calling everyone down and start saying, enough of this crap. Take care of it and do your job because your ethical duty at the present time is to make sure the people are protected. You're telling everyone they're doing all these things, but in essence, they're not doing any of it. And I'm sorry I'm being rude and I'm being crude, but I'm just sick of it. Hire rangers. There's 3PI money to hire rangers. We've been doing the same song and dance for the last number of years, and nothing is done. We're at lower counts of rangers than ever before. So, you have a park system that has all these people, and you don't have any interaction. You have no PR. You don't take care of the mountains. You don't take care of the people. And we need to start doing that. Thanks.
Councilman Nowakowski.
So reading this report, we have about 41 major trailheads and about 200 miles of designated trails in the city of Phoenix, right?
That's accurate.
And we only have 55 rangers, so that's less than, that's almost, you don't even have 2 rangers per trailhead, right? And the other thing too is that we have about, you're saying about 3.1 million people that actually use our trail, our trails and hiking trails. And that's what we've monitored, but there's probably even more than that. So my concern is that we're talking about 55 rangers, you divide that by 3 million, we're talking about 56,000 people per ranger. That's a lot of people per ranger. And what we've been seeing is that we get these texts all the time that people are stranded, people are stuck, rescue crews going up there and rescuing individuals. So my concern is that instead of using and being proactive, maybe we need to start looking at a more proactive way of doing all these great programs. I know that we're limited in resources, and that's something that we as council members need to make those decisions when it comes to budget time. But at the same time, if Phoenix is being known as a destination point for hikers, and I mean it's something great for tourism and for our state, that we need to start investing more. And I hear you, Tim, and I hear what you're saying is we do have 55 good rangers that are out there, and those individuals are doing everything they can with the limited resources that we provide them. And I think we need to really look at how to increase those rangers so that the education programs that we have, that we do touch many kids and many families, that we continue to do that. But most important, how do we prevent all these accidents and even deaths on our mountains, especially during the summertime? And how do we start enforcing it if we don't have enough enforcement? We're talking about 56,000 people per ranger. That's just outrageous. So I think it's something that we need to look at when it comes to budgeting. And I think it's something that we've been seeing an increase of people that are hiking when it's 115 degrees outside, and somebody needs to enforce that. We need to come up with some types of restrictions of when people can actually go out there and hike, and for their own safety, and animals too, you know, dogs and all that, now that we restrict that. But prior to that, I mean, we had problems with animals that were dehydrating out there too, and people never thought about how they were taking their dogs on the trails, and they were suffering also. So I think that you brought up some great points. I think it's something that we need to look at, and I like to look at it even more so. If we're going to have, I never knew that we had over 3 million people hiking our trails and only 55 rangers actually managing those trails. I think that's a large number. I think it's going to continue to grow as Phoenix becomes more popular through all these events that we have, from Super Bowls to the 4-on-4 to our spring training, that if there's certain peaks that maybe we need to look at hiring part-times or something, right? But that's one concern I have, and I like to see somehow we maybe address it during our budget hearings. Thank you.
So, public safety is obviously one of, I would say, all 3 of our passions to making sure that there's safety no matter where you are in the city. In particular on the trails, and as Councilman Nowakowski has stated, we have lots of people on our trails, and yet we have minimal park rangers. So my request is that, Inger, you come back as the director and figure out a proposal, a budget proposal for adding more rangers to our preserves and the park system. In addition to that, I would like to see it coming out of the 3PI. Jerry and Tim and Greta have, it's going to be 3 years for me, and I have heard this for 3 years, and I have tried to figure out at the very beginning of my term how to solve this problem. Every time we think we're solving it, and we're not, and I am now requesting that there is a formal proposal to be in front of us.
People are dying too, right? It's a health issue.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we will get that together for you.
Thank you. Is there any other statements, questions? Okay, thank you. I
You know, I
made,
do have one more, I'm
Okay.
sorry. And even our flatland parks, I mean, that's something that I
Yeah.
know that we're shorthanded sometimes.
Yeah.
And in the evenings from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock, I mean, all of our parks are just jam-packed. Soccer, football, baseball, volleyball, you name it, basketball. I mean, it's just incredible how our parks are being used, and just to have more rangers out there, because sometimes kids can be kids and little fights break out, and not having somebody out there as an official parks employee or our park ranger to make sure everything's going smooth, or just little hiccups where somebody might lock the bathrooms by accident and somebody had it scheduled to use the fields and stuff like that, or even the lights for some reason then automatically turn on for some reason, that somebody can actually be cruising around. I know that we have a skeleton crew in the evenings, but even with the park rangers being assigned to some of our flat parks would be nice also.
Thank you. Thank you. I made a mistake. I left out a public comment, and is it okay if we go back to that because I missed? And it's Marion Barbara. No. Well, I want to call you Marin because in Spanish it's Marin, but okay. I was like, it was like it's Marin in Spanish, but
What title?
So as it was given to me by my mother, Marin Bramblett.
oh, Marin.
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning. It was actually great timing to come after these comments because I'm here to speak about my research as an ASU graduate student. I'm in the Applied Ethics and Biomedical and Health program, but I have a focus on green space and the effects on public health. And so I have been researching on access and equal access, and I'm becoming concerned with the access that's not exactly equal to our parks. Specifically, I have been interested, excuse me, I've been interested in the Desert Botanical Gardens because they have a very unique space. They are not exactly a park, and they offer different characteristics from some of our other parks in the city that have been proven in other studies to reduce stress. And as Phoenix, we know, is one of the largest and fastest growing cities in the United States, the compounding factors of this urban growth can really put a lot of extra stress on our citizens. So I'm concerned with more equal access to our green spaces, specifically the botanical gardens, to reduce and alleviate some of these stressors to increase our public health. And I found that there are economic, there are physical and psychological obstacles that people have to overcome to access some of these spaces. So even though that my particular research is with the Desert Botanical Gardens, and I'm continuing that, I wanted to bring this to attention of the committee because I feel that my work, once it's completed, will be able to be repurposed and used to increase access to more of our city's parks and to improve them in general. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move to item 11, and then what I will do is move back to item number 7. Councilman Nowakowski would like to listen to item number 7.
And Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, today we're here to give you our annual update on Phoenix Golf and the progress that we have made on the 7 focus areas that were approved by the City Council in the Golf Balancing Plan in 2013. Today I have Tim Merritt with me, who's the Deputy Director over the program, and David Hockett, who's the Director of Golf Operations. You see on the screen the 7 focus areas. In 2012, you may recall that the Budget and Research Department, at the direction of the City Manager, conducted a study to identify the options that we had to improve the financial condition of the Golf Fund. There were several public meetings, Parks Board meetings, as well as the Citizen Golf Ad Hoc Committee meetings. And again, in 2013, that's when the City Council approved the plan moving forward. The plan was responsive to the community. The various areas were really focused on neighborhood preservation, providing attainable recreation opportunities, and being financially responsible in the golf program. First thing was that all 6 golf courses continue to remain open to the public, and these are pictures of all of them that we have in our system. Keeping the courses was very important to the community because it was providing in close proximity attainable and cost-effective opportunities for recreational golf. It was also important for open space, that we just heard, open space for the neighborhoods. And so those were some of the key areas, and again, the plan outlined those. We see about 300,000 golfers come through our program in the fiscal year of 15-16. That's what the number was, including things like people who come just to hit on the golf range and also do the putting there in front of the golf courses. And this particular program recovers 80% of its expenditures. We've gotten a little bit better over the years also in tightening that up. As you also recall, and has been brought up many times in our subcommittee meetings and today as well, the golf deficit was retired by the Parks and Preserve Initiative funds, which was also approved in March of 2013. This is Aguila Golf Course, and all of the golf courses had the consultant gave us what they expected the expense would be to repair pumps and irrigation systems and all of the facilities that would be important to have an effective and efficient golf course. And so over the last couple of years, we've replaced pumps, we've improved irrigation systems, and at Palo Verde, we had a pretty bad-looking fence that we were able to replace, as well as the netting for the driving range, both at Encanto and Palo Verde, because it had become unsafe and dangerous, and so we replaced those things. Those are the major improvements we've done over the last year. This is Papago Golf Course, again, a very beautiful site and nice rock formations that kind of surround it. Staff has really been working hard to make sure that we keep tightening our belt in places where we can. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the golf course recovers 80% of its expenditures, and a program like aquatics or the swimming pools only recovers 10%. So it does a good job recovering the fees that it costs to operate the program. Focus Area 6 was to issue an RFP for the management of Papago Golf Course. We did that, and then after that point, we also were able to get Grand Canyon University to take over Maryvale Golf Course, and they've been very successful. They put in $11.5 million of repairs to the golf course, to a clubhouse, a very nice clubhouse, as well as the surrounding community. They were able to assist in some of those renovations in the houses and areas around there, and made the fence area nicer for the people looking in. That golf course was opened last year in January, and we're expecting their financial report to come into us at the end of this month. And as you know, also, Arizona Golf Community Foundation manages the Papago Golf Course. They are finalizing their plans for a $9 million clubhouse that should be finished early next year, and they'll actually break ground in the summer of this coming year.
Do we have a partnership with ASU, with Papago, or?
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, the partnership is with ASU, and the Arizona Golf Foundation, Community Foundation, runs it for them, so they're the operator for ASU.
Got it.
The financial performance of Phoenix Golf continues to trend in a positive direction. The subsidy that we have allocated for from the general fund has come under each year. Last year we were further under than we had been in the past. And again, golf rounds are up. In 2013, 2014, there were 212,000 rounds played. This last year, there were 223,000 rounds played. So again, it's on the increase. This is Encanto Golf Course. There are historic restrictions over portions of this golf course, and so one of the things that we talk about in the 7 steps are the deed restrictions. This one has some restrictions from a historic perspective over it, particularly related to buildings and things of that nature. Cave Creek, was built over a landfill, and so this particular facility has some unique challenges because of methane collection and those types of things. But a portion of this property was actually given to us by John F. Long. And so if we were to do something different with this property, the balance of the property that was not a landfill would go back to the John F. Long Properties Incorporated. Aguila, this one was acquired from the federal government and has some restrictions based on the rules and regulations. It must remain a public park or a public recreational for a public recreational purpose. And again, this particular facility has Cesar Chavez Park located right next to it, and is really a very beautiful setting as well, adding to that green space that the young lady spoke about just a minute ago. Palo Verde, this had a restriction for 11 years, and there was some specific language, and I'll read it because it's legal language, that it automatically extended every year unless and until the holders of the legal and equitable title to the premises execute and record an amendment to this declaration that specifies otherwise, which means now that we've paid off the debt related to this, there would have to be some sort of a declaration removing the restriction to do anything to this particular property, and this is Palo Verde Golf Course.
So going back to that, so who has to lift those restrictions?
We would need to work with our legal counsel. I imagine it would be a city council action.
Thank you.
Finally, just a couple of nice pictures of the junior programs that we have. One of our age-friendly communities kind of activities. This gentleman was participating in the American Heart Association stroke tournament. And so, we have programs for all ages. We're increasing our programming for junior programs. We're going to have junior golf days that will have instruction for the kids. They get the opportunity to play at no charge if they're under the age of 17, and if their parents or family members play with them, they get reduced rates. They get an opportunity to hit at the driving range with a PGA professional, and if they don't have clubs, they can get clubs at no cost to themselves for that particular day, and they also finish up the day with lunch. So we're building our next generation of golfers, again, to enjoy this recreational opportunity that is affordable in municipal golf. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
Do we have any cards?
I do have a card. Greta?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This, as usual, is a glorious report on a subject that has been very tender and fractious for a long time. If we have 80% return, we have 20% debt. I want the figures, please. I want the dollar figure, please. Do you have it? Then I would like it enunciated. $300,000 recovery leaves 20% unrecovered. That's debt. Who's paying the debt? And out of what fund are you paying the debt? And how long can we go on like this, incurring debt against, I guess it would be the general fund. I may be wrong. Papago recovers 8% of costs. Sell it. Sell it to ASU on similar terms and conditions as you did with Maryvale, which still allows public to play when GCU isn't utilizing it for their educational and training purposes. So get rid of it. And sell PV. I want to read the legal language around PV. I want a copy of it, I want to read it, and I'm going to take it to our attorney. PV is close to Encanto and GCU. And those people who play frequently at PV can drive 5 minutes to Encanto and maybe 5 to 10 to GCU. We can't afford luxury, and that's what we're still supporting with debt.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, if I could just make a clarification. The city still does own both Maryvale and Papago.
And my understanding is the city owns both the lands, both the golf courses. It's being leased to those entities.
Long-term leases
Yes.
to both, yes.
Okay. Tim?
Thank you once again. I guess there's a couple of questions. First question is, has ASU paid any money for Papago Golf Course to date? And my next question is, how much money is it going to take over the next number of years to bring the golf courses up to a manageable maintenance level? How much money is it going to cost? I've looked at figures that say $9 million. Where's the $9 million going to come from? It's not coming from 3PI money. So if it's coming anywhere, it's going to come from the general fund, because I think 3PI has been tapped out enough for golf course funds at the present time. We're done with that. So the $9 million, where's it going to come from? And has any of these other courses that other people have taken over, has the city received any money from these people? Because people need to, it's our golf courses, we've maintained it, we paid for it. Are we giving these people smoking deals? Because I think, ASU got a smoking deal on the baseball diamond that they ended up getting, baseball. And so now did they get a smoking deal on the golf course also? Because we're supposed to be protecting the public's interest here, so and not giving, other people great smoking deals so they can take over and manage it correctly and make money. So I'd like to know, a couple of those questions, what we're going to do to pay all these new maintenance things. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, I can answer one question very easily. ASU does have an obligation to pay us $200,000 every year for rent. And so we have received that money from them. That is what the agreement says.
Okay. What I would ask for is in a future item that we discuss these. Questions? Councilmember Nowakowski.
So in our package, it talks about profit and loss. So looking at the two parcels that were golf courses that we're leasing out, Maryville and Papago, I mean, we actually have a profit of about $421,000.
Madam
correct?
Chair, members of the subcommittee, that is the rent that ASU paid.
Okay. And then we're looking at profit and loss on the other golf courses. So we're talking about Aguila, Cave Creek, and Encanto. It averages about $254,000 of loss. Then we're looking at just Palo Verde by itself. It's it's $299,000, rounded out to $300,000 that we're losing there. So I think we're doing pretty well leasing it out to Grand Canyon University and ASU. We're getting a profit back. Where my concern is that we need to look at Palo Verde, if we can actually bring it closer and maybe cut that in half or so, the losses. Because $300,000 is really, when you add up all the other three golf courses, doesn't even equal that. So it looks like that's the problem that we're having right now with our golf courses. So if there's some type of a plan or long-term strategy to bring it closer to the losses of our other golf courses, that would be something I'd like to see.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, part of the reason that Palo Verde has a little bit more of a difficult time is it's only 9 holes, where every other golf course is 18 or has 18 plus 9. And so that's part of the issue there.
Councilman Valenzuela?
Any of these numbers in the red, we need a long-term plan. We need to try to figure it out. I do appreciate the flexibility of your team, Inger, and frankly of our city to create these partnerships like Papago and Maryville Golf Course. Obviously, I was at the table for the Maryville Golf Course and the GCU partnership, and turning, a golf course that we had to subsidize, if I'm not mistaken, at the tune of about a couple $100,000 a year, into something that would get an investment of $11.5 million. More people playing golf. It's a beautiful course, and so just showing that flexibility and just being a problem solver there. I don't agree with Councilman Nowakowski's comment of bringing one loss down and making and having it acceptable because it's at the rate of a different loss. At the end of the day, we have a golf program that we have to continue to work on. I do feel that golf is something that brings value, especially to our youth. I would have never, and I'm not a professional golfer by any means, but I would have never had an opportunity to play golf as a kid growing up in Maryville had it not been for the city courses and a few bucks in my pocket. And, I appreciate that we don't charge for our basketball courts. I appreciate that we charge very little to go swimming in the summer for our youth. And so I don't think it's a bad program, and I stand by the program. I think I don't think singling out one course because it has more of a loss than the others. They're all losing. It'd be great if we had a partnership for Aguila or Cape Creek or Encana or any of the others like we have in Maryville. I don't know if that's possible, but I think we should look for them. I do feel that the loss, if we're losing nearly $300,000 on a course, we need to be problem solvers and try to figure that out. And if we're losing $111,000 on a course, we have to try to figure that one out as well. So, and I appreciate the information. I know that this is just for information today. I appreciate all the work that you continue to put into this, your entire team. And I appreciate the patience, especially from the public, because when we were first talking about this just a couple of years ago, this room was packed with lots of people who are very passionate about this option. And we obviously have lots of people that are passionate. Well, people are passionate one way or the other. Some people would like us to get totally out of the golf business, and some see a value and understand the investment. And so, there has to be a balance there, and obviously, more work has to be done. But thank you very much for the work that you've already put in, and this is important for us.
Councilman Nowakowski.
I agree with you on we have to figure it out. But when we're losing $300,000 on one golf course, where all the other golf courses added together are $250,000, we need to be good stewards with their tax dollars. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to come up with some benchmarks and some kind of strategy to help Palo Verde out and to figure out how we're going to narrow that gap so we can actually end up being at zero loss for all the golf courses. And if we don't have that strategy, that plan, or long-term plans, short-term plans in place, then we need to figure it out. Because as we go on, our pensions are going up, the costs, we want more police officers, more firefighters, and more services out there. We got to figure out how to stop the bleeding in all of our golf courses, and especially the ones that are bleeding more. I mean, I would love to have swimming pools in every single park, libraries, and all that, but we can't. So I think that looking at a strategy and making sure we have benchmarks and that we're good stewards with the tax dollars that we're supposed to be allocating out to different programs and courses out there, that we do that. And that's what I'm asking for, is some type of, not to close Palo Verde, but to look at a strategic plan, short-term, long-term. And if we can't figure it out, then we need to do something about the bleeding. Thank you.
Councilman Valenzuela.
Yeah, thank you. So this is well, again, I don't want to lose momentum because our city staff deserves a great deal of credit here. When we had this conversation a couple of years ago, there was a lot more bleeding than this. you know, and a lot of work has been done with a couple of the great partners. In fact, if you look at the numbers, you know, we do have collectively between 4 golf courses there, we're losing about $550,000. Well, between 2 partnerships that have been created by our city staff from 2 golf courses so far, we're in the black, $421,000, and I think it could even be better once GCU shows us their numbers. And so so a lot of great work has already been done. Now we have to do more work. My point is just stating that golf, having a golf program in the city, it just comes down to a cost of living decision. Do we want, all of these things are going to cost money for a community. Libraries will cost money, parks will cost money, swimming pools will cost money, after school programs cost money, and the list goes on. Having these beautiful these preserves cost money. And all of it is being subsidized in one way or the other by the tax dollar, by the taxpayer. We have to figure out the balance. That's what governing is all about. Figure out the balance and what works and what doesn't work. If we are in the golf business to make money, I don't know if we're not in the golf business to do that, but we're also not in the basketball court business in parks to make money, which takes lighting. We're not in the swimming pool business to make money. You know, these are cost of living decisions that have to be made ultimately by the general public and by the policymakers. So if that's not the conversation, then, because if that is a conversation, let me go there. If it is the objective to be in the golf business to make money, then losing $111,000 is also pretty bad. In fact, losing $31,000 is pretty bad. At some point, we have to decide if we want a golf program and what that's going to cost the city. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have made some major strides because of the partnerships at Papago and Maryville to sustain this, to help sustain this golf program. We have more work to do, but I think it's premature to assume that we should be closing golf courses at this point. We have to continue to make them marketable. You look at Palo Verde, you know, one of the things that I brought up a year, I keep saying a couple of years ago, it seems like it's been that long, it probably has been, right? Was the fact that it looked like a terrible, it looked like a terrible course. It's a great course, but it's only a 9-hole course, but some of the improvements have been made, you know, with the fencing and those types of things, the netting, making it more appealing so that people would be willing to golf more and continuing to work on those types of things. I don't have all the answers now. We have to get them, but I certainly know that one of the answers is not to simply close the door.
So I would like to, this conversation has started way before I entered. And so I'm kind of in the middle of all the pieces. But what I would like to say to the staff is that you have done a great job in taking on this issue or situation and really changing it and being good innovators in building partnerships. What I would ask staff is to possibly start looking for partnerships for Palo Verde and see if we can find some partnerships for Palo Verde and then, or all the other parks. But I think that's just the way we're going to have to start looking at this situation. The other piece is it's very valuable that we do have a golf program. It's very valuable that we have an after-school program, a basketball program, a soccer program, a baseball program. Everything is valuable because we have young children that need to be in a structured sports environment. It creates team building. It creates community building. All those pieces that we would like in our community. And so I don't think it's one or the other or anything like that. I think right now we just need to be good thinkers and good solving problem solvers for the future. We are in the middle of we have all these needs, and how do we figure it out as we govern for the future? And so I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, because I know it's been difficult in these certain times. So thank you. Item 7. History of park land sales.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, so I don't have a formal presentation, but I certainly can give you the history of how we got to the point in the Parks and Recreation Board. Several years ago, there was 2 acres of property near in a park near a trail called Little Canyon Park, and that property was sold to the Grand Canyon University to improve that university. Because of that, some community members felt that we should have a process, which we did not really have in place, to get community input, to get community feedback. And so there was a period of 2 years where the Parks Board worked with a community group. There were several people on that community group who put together a proposal with staff, and we went back and forth for a really long time. And the group felt that there needed to be multiple opportunities for people to get that communication, whether it was through the Village Planning Committee, whether it was actually meetings that were in the community, coming down to the Parks Board. And they really wanted multiple options because not everybody can come down to the City Council chambers for a Parks Board meeting. Not everybody knows about the Village Planning Committee. So there were multiple steps, and it's a 9-step process that was approved in April of 2013. And as a Parks Board policy that outlined how you communicate to the public, when you communicate, and what the steps are going towards the eventual sale of property if that's where the community desired the process to go. And so we have not sold any property since this policy has been put in place. We do have 2 pieces currently that are in the process, and they're at the 9th step. There's one at Rose Mofford. It's a parcel that we don't have funding to build on in the near future. And there's a parcel near Cuban Park that the school district was interested in. And so those are the 2 pieces currently that we have in the process. Appraisals have been ordered, and also the surveys have been ordered. And so once those steps have been finalized, we will come to the full council for those 2 particular items. Last month, I took a suggested recommendation to the Parks Board, and they asked us to give more feedback on the process of, and they're looking at it as well. Maybe it's taking too long in this day and age to sell the property, but I think there's quite a few residents who have indicated that the reason that the process might need to be lengthy is maybe they're out of town that particular week and they don't get to the meeting. They wanted to have their voices heard, and so it's a very lengthy process, which is in your packet, and it outlines what you do, when you do it, and so that's kind of just a very quick summary of the park land sale policy that the Parks Board has for disposal of parkland. And again, it was a 5-0 vote in 2013 in April.
Councilman Valenzuela.
Thanks, Inger, for the information. I'm very familiar with it because the parkland that was sold, and I think a land swap is obviously the correct term, because it wasn't just a piece of property that was sold to GCU. GCU then had to agree to purchase a piece of property, and
Correct.
I believe in this
That's
case, a land swap was a piece of property that was purchased in South Phoenix.
That's correct.
For for this, and this is before my time. So
That's correct.
my predecessor, a good person, good council member in Claude Maddox, was on the council when that first took place, but frankly, it landed on my desk because I took office in 2012, and that's when a lot of this discussion was happening. So I worked closely with city staff and delivered information to the Parks Board to help make it more of a transparent process, so that this type of a transaction couldn't be done with little to no public input, because at the end of the day, one neighborhood lost a piece of green space to a neighborhood several miles away, and it was good for that neighborhood that gained it, but you get the point. So today, I think it's actually a better process. It's more transparent, and it gives people an opportunity to come out and be heard. So that's always a good thing. So I'm happy with where we are today with it, and obviously the Parks Board supported it 5-0, April 2013. So they were happy with it as well. Thank you.
Councilman Nowakowski.
The concern I have with the whole 9-step process is that it's almost impossible to sell or trade parkland. I mean, we have 8 large parcels in Levine. For example, what happens is a developer goes out there, they trade off 14 acres of land or 20 acres of land for impact fees, and basically we end up having a neighborhood park that's ran by the association, and then we have 14 acres of dirt right next to that neighborhood park, and people are complaining that for the last 10, 12 years, the city hasn't developed their future parks, that it's blighted, that every time the wind blows or so, there's a dust bowl and all that. And you have beautiful communities with large parcels of property that the city owns for a future park. Because of our crises back in 2007, 2008, those future plans have been put off for the next 20 years or so. So saying that, individuals have come to us saying, hey, we can develop maybe something else on that property, but it's almost taking a whole year to actually do that. Once they get the financing and all that, they just don't want to go through all that hassle. I mean, it's like triple what we normally do for any other piece of property. So I was just wondering, how can you, first of all, we don't purchase future land unless we have the funding to actually develop the property, so we don't have these big parcels of 14 acres of land in a community that's already developed, where we have no future plans in building a park in the long term, right? The other thing too is how can we bring it back to the Parks Board to look at ways that the community can actually have an input, but at the same time it makes it financially viable for a person to actually find the funding and to build something on there that the community would like to have. So that's one of the things I would like to look at, because I think that sometimes we have people that come into meetings and up in arms, and then sometimes we overkill things. And I think that we overkilled it on this thing, on this process here. I believe that transparency is very important. I believe that we need to make sure that the community has different processes to come in and have their input. But at the same time, we have a community that I represent in Levine and Estrella with large parcels of property that they're begging to do something with it. The neighborhood associations are even trying to say, hey, we'll take it over, but at the same time they want us to maintain it and develop it, and then they would take it over in the future. But I mean, it's still hard for the city of Phoenix to come up with that funding to even develop some of these parks and turn it over to the neighborhood associations. Even schools that neighbor these 14 acres or so, the process is just hard for them to jump through all those hoops to make it happen. So I think that we overreacted. That I think we need to find something in the middle where it's actually we're able to sell the property or trade the property for the good of the community and have community input. So I'd like to see somehow, some way that we revisit it so that it is a win-win for everyone. especially the communities that have these new developments and all these parcels of property in their new developments that a lot of times trying to get a hold of the landowner that's around the parks, that a lot of them are investors from Canada and other parts of the country. And you can get the renters, but you can't get the individuals that actually owns the property to come to the process and stuff. So there's a lot of little hiccups that I think when it was created, it was created around a certain situation that was happening in a developed community that people own the properties. When these new communities, a lot of them are renters, and it's just hard to get the landowner to come down or even to sign a paper to agree to the process. So I'd like to see it revisited somehow.
So my understanding, and I think it's already happening, is that the Parks Board is revisiting this item. And that's the dialogue I have had with people on the Parks Board and Inger, and it is in the process of.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, they asked us last month to look at the entire process. So we've done some benchmarking, and we'll be doing a report back to them this month, which is actually tomorrow. And so we'll better have some information for you at the next meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilman Valenzuela.
Okay, so they are reviewing it. Just a little history, again, before my time, but this is one of the things that was put on my desk, and I had to learn quickly. There was very little, if any, public input. That's the way it was. I mean, when GCU, and I will say, I've been such a big proponent for what is happening in Alhambra, and I work closely with GCU and all of the community leaders to continue to help that become a more vibrant community. I mean, many can make the argument that trade for that piece of property there at GCU to help them expand their campus, that was absolutely for the betterment of the community. I'm not arguing against that. In fact, I agree. In fact, I've helped GCU with zoning issues to continue to help expand their footprint in the area, and because of it, it's a safer community today, and it's a stronger economy today, and more kids, more students are getting educated, and so on. I really believe that was for the betterment of the community. I also believe that transparency is paramount. The public process is incredibly important, and we made it better by turning it into a public process. And I just want to caution against taking a step back and making something less transparent. And as far as I understand, this process as it stands does not make it impossible for people with parkland or for the city with parkland to continue the business of, trading parkland or I want to be careful in saying selling parkland, because at the end of the day,
Disposal.
it's a trade. I mean, we're not just selling off parkland here, but all of that is now a public process where in the past it wasn't. And the new rules do not make it impossible for the city to continue to do business. It puts a couple of layers in there, and it may be inconvenient for some, but frankly, when you're making it more transparent and when you are, making it a public process, it is what it is, and I support it. Now, if the Parks Board is looking at that once again, I'm interested to see what will come of it, but I would caution against making it less transparent.
Madam
So-
Chair, members of the subcommittee, it actually took 2 years to get to that point. So again, there'll be lots of discussions, I can imagine.
Well, that's what I wanted to explain, Inger, on how long it took just to get to that piece.
Right.
And me leading at this chair right now, I could let you know that transparency will definitely be part of the public process, all the way through. So,
Great.
And just real quick clarification, it's not that we're trying to take parklands away. We're talking about new developments that have parks, neighborhood parks, that are managed by associations, and that neighborhood saying, we already have 5 parks that are in our neighborhoods. So I believe that the new neighborhoods weren't looked into this process when the process was done. So I was just making sure that we revisit, making sure that new developments that have their own neighborhood parks developed in it are taken into consideration. That's what it's all about. Anything that's traded or sold, that funds go back into the parks for future parks or in that area where that property is purchased or traded. So thank you.
I don't have any other public comments. Oh. Brent Kleiman?
All right. Yes. Oh, you came in the last minute.
Lucky I found a parking space. My name is Brent Kleinman in Encanto Palmcroft neighborhood. I wanted to speak in the public as far as the Encanto Park Clubhouse Garden, and I guess the best way to say is the issues that have been going on as far as the process in reinvigorating the garden in front of the clubhouse, the involved parties, the communication, and the potential naming of this garden. So, excuse me, as a member of the Historic Preservation Association in the neighborhood and a member of Friends of Encanto Park, I just want to lodge our concern of the lack of communication and involvement by a group of people that have bent over backwards to make the park what it is. We've donated time, money, effort to better the park and feel like we've been really put out in the cold on this. So wanted to get down here before you guys ended your day and share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Meeting adjourned. Oh, future agenda items. Anything? I mean, we have a,
Did we have
Anybody
the park
wanna add?
ranger stuff?
yeah, we added it. Greta. Sure. You want to go over there, Greta?
I hope attention is given to this gentleman's concern vis-a-vis Encanto. It's the original park in the city of Phoenix, and we can't let it go to the dogs. I want to commend the three of you for the service, the thoughtful and objective thinking service you've given to this subcommittee. As the three of you know, I'm a regular attender at several subcommittees, and this is probably my most important one. But you have given us good, thoughtful comment and objective thinking toward future and present improvement of planning. The missing member, who happens to represent the district I live in, but he doesn't represent me, hasn't been here for the last two meetings. And this is a habit of Sal's, both at this meeting, I don't know other subcommittees he's on because I don't pay that much attention to who's on what, but council meetings too. If he can't get into a pair of slacks and a dress shirt to come to a meeting, then he should be asked to resign. He lives where I live, and it doesn't take him any longer to get here than it does me. Only I've got 40 years on him. But thank you, and thank you for your thoughtfulness in all that you say and project in these meetings. And to you, Laura, thank you for the way you conduct it.
Thank you, Greta. Meeting adjourned.